What happens when a game developer spends a weekend binge-watching Die Hard, Mission Impossible and Speed, plays through the entire Resident Evil trilogy, and then decides the world needs a tactical thriller set entirely on a moving locomotive? You get Chase the Express, or as it was rebranded for the North American market, Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn. This is a game that I've always held a massive amount of nostalgia for. A title that feels like a fever dream of the year 2000. It arrived right at the sunset of the PlayStation's life cycle, a 2-disc epic that tried to take the slow, deliberate tension of a survival horror and inject it with the high-octane adrenaline of a Hollywood blockbuster. The setup is pure 90s gold. You play as Jack Morton, a NATO specialist who finds himself in the last line of defence on the Blue Harvest, a diplomatic train travelling through Europe that is seized by a group of high-tech terrorists called the Siberian Brigade. The French ambassador has been taken hostage, there's a nuclear threat looming, and you have to work your way from the back of the train to the engine, one carriage at a time. It's a die-hard on a train premise that works surprisingly well for the hardware. Because the entire game takes place on a linear moving vehicle, the developers at Sugar and Rocket had to get incredibly creative with how you navigate the space. You aren't just walking through passenger cars, you're climbing onto the roof while the winds howl past, crawling through the undercarriage and engaging in tense shootouts in cramped dining cars. For a kid growing up in the PlayStation era, Chase the Express felt like a playable movie. It had the cinematic flair of a Kojima production, but it kept its feet firmly planted in the tank control roots of the 32-bit era. It's a game that asks you to be precise, to manage a few key resources and feel the weight of every bullet fired in a hallway that's only a few pixels wide. But as I've recently discovered through a fresh replay, that nostalgia can sometimes mask the reality of the experience. It's a game of brilliant forward-thinking ideas buried under a layer of the Sunset era jank. It's a forgotten masterpiece of late-gen polish, but it's also a game that will test your patience with its clunky aiming and relentless backtracking. It's time we gave Jack Morton his ticket and looked at what it's like to really save the world at 90 miles per hour.
Mr. Ambassador, as you can see, you have no choice. And your wife's life means nothing to me.
Mama?
You had better realize this. Understand?
Leave my family alone!
How do you do, Mr. Ambassador? I am Boris Ugoski, the leader of our little band of terrorists called the Knights of the Apocalypse.
Knights of the Apocalypse? What do you want?
I am planning to use this train to obtain funds for our activities.
What are you talking about? You're going to pay for this.
Be quiet and listen. I'm in charge here.
Papa!
No, Mr. Ambassador, you are mistaken. It is your government that is going to pay $20 billion. And I brought this little toy with me to convince you. Attention, French government. We, the Knights of the Apocalypse, are now approaching your border.
Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index Entry 68. We're stopping on the tracks today for a game that suffers with a bit of a regional identity crisis. If you're watching this in the UK or Europe, you probably know this one as Chase the Express, but over in North America, it was rebranded as Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn. Why they felt the need to swap a punchy, literal title for something that sounds like a generic bargain bin action movie is anyone's guess, but underneath the name change, the soul of the game remains the same. Released in the year 2000, this was very much a sunset title for the PlayStation. By this point, developers had spent years squeezing every last drop of power out of the grey box, and it shows. It's a 2-disc epic that arrived right as the hype for the PlayStation 2 was reaching a fever pitch. Because of that timing, a lot of people missed out on what is arguably one of the most polished and unique action thrillers on the system. It took the fixed camera survival horror style that Resident Evil made famous and repurposed it for a high-stakes hostage rescue mission. Documenting this entry is a bit of a personal mission for me. It's a game I've always held close to my heart, but playing it as an adult is a different experience than playing it as a kid. It sits in that weird space between genres, part stealth, part shooter, part puzzle solver, all wrapped up in a cinematic package that felt like a playable blockbuster back in the day. We're going to look at why this die-hard on a train formula works so well, how the developers managed to make a linear environment feel massive, and the reality of the clunky mechanics that come with it. Let's get the ticket punched and see if this journey still holds up 26 years later. When you strip away the tactical jargon, Chase the Express is essentially a love letter to the 90s action blockbuster. It's that very specific subgenre of die-hard in a blank that dominated cinema for decades. And here, the blank is $1 million locomotive hurtling through a snowy European landscape. It's a fascinating hybrid. On one hand, you have the slow, methodical DNA of a survival horror game, the fixed camera angles that hide what's around the corner, and the heavy, deliberate tank controls. On the other, you have the frantic energy of a shooter, where you're constantly outnumbered and outgunned. The game excels at setting that one-man army tone. You start the game almost completely isolated. The Blue Harvest has been overtaken, the French ambassador and his family are under guard, and Jack Morton is the only variable the terrorists didn't account for. It creates this immediate sense of forward momentum. Because the environment is literally a narrow tube, the game doesn't need to guide you with arrows or waypoints. Your objective is always forward. You're moving from the luggage van, through the passenger cars, into dining areas, and eventually towards the engine. This setting provides a natural tension that most games have to manufacture. There's no running away into a wide open field here. If a terrorist opens fire at the end of a corridor, you have nowhere to go but down or behind a crate. It forces you into this rhythmic style of play where you're constantly checking corners and listening for the footfalls of the Siberian Brigade over the roar of the tracks. It's a brilliant way to use the hardware's limitations, the static pre-rendered backgrounds, to create a sense of claustrophobia that actually enhances the action hero fantasy. You aren't just playing a game, you're playing a movie where the set is constantly moving beneath your feet.
Where are they holding the ambassador's family?
Mrs. Simon and their daughter Jane were taken to car number 13. I was kept here to be executed.
You said car 13? The ambassador's in car 10. His secretary Mason is guarding him, but it's still not safe. Go up there and stay with them.
All right, but I wish I had a radio to communicate with you.
Here, use this.
Thanks, and good luck, Lieutenant Morton.
Call me Jack.
Okay.
While the cinematic presence sells the dream of being a high-speed hero, replaying the game reveals the literal legwork involved. This is where the train jog comes into play. In a standard adventure game, backtracking usually involves exploring a sprawling mansion or a city district, but Chase the Express, backtracking means running up and down the same narrow hallway for the 10th time. Because the game is a linear line of carriages, any objective that isn't directly in front of you requires a long, repetitive sprint. It often goes like this. You fight your way to carriage 12 to find a specific keycard or trigger a plot point, only for the game to tell you the door you now need to open is back at carriage 3. So you turn around and begin the trek. Since the game relies on those fixed camera angles, every transition between carriages involves a brief load and pause and camera shift. When you're doing this across 10 different cars, it can start to feel less like a tactical mission and more like a very dangerous morning commute. The developers tried to mitigate this by spawning new enemies or changing the state of certain rooms, but the fundamental layout remains the same. You become intimately familiar with every seat cushion and luggage track on the Blue Harvest. This yo-yo design was likely a way to pad out the game's length. After all, a train is only so long, but it can definitely test your patience. You aren't exploring new worlds, you're mastering a single cramped one. It creates a weirdly domestic relationship with the environment. You know exactly which carriages are going to have enemies popping out at you, and which doors take just a little second longer to slide open, making the train feel less like a level and more like a physical place you're trapped in.
Ambassador, are you all right?
I think so. Who are you?
Lieutenant Jack Morton of NATO, sir. I was sent here to rescue you.
Oh, thank God. They took my family away. My wife and daughter.
Do you know where they took them?
The terrorists were talking about taking them and one SP to the rear car.
And who are you?
My name is Mason. I'm the ambassador's secretary. I've also been in the military and SP service.
I see. Mr. Ambassador, a rescue team is coming, but I'll try to rescue your family myself. Ambassador and Mr. Mason, you'd better stay right here and wait until you hear from me.
As you're performing your 5th train jog on the hour, you're inevitably going to run into a Siberian brigade. This is where the 32-bit polish starts to lose its shine. The combat in Chase the Express is a constant battle between your reflexes and the game's temperamental lock-on system. In theory, Jack Morton is a highly trained NATO operative, but in practice, his aim can be absolutely inconsistent. The game uses a semi-automatic targeting system that is supposed to snap onto the nearest threat, but it's often at the mercy of those cinematic camera angles. You'll transition into a new carriage, see a terrorist at the far end of the hall, and the game will automatically just find its lock on, only for you to move the D-pad slightly, and then Jack is looking at the wall, while the enemy peppers him with lead. Because the hallways are so narrow, there is zero room for error. You can't really strafe or dodge, you're standing in a kill box. It's a frustrating experience that forces you to game the system, learning exactly where to stand so the camera transition doesn't break your target lock. When it works, it feels great. You're popping off rounds, dropping enemies and moving with purpose. But when it fails, it reminds you that the PlayStation was never really designed for precision shooting. This clunkiness is probably unavoidable given the setting. You're in a metal tube after all, but it turns every encounter into a high-stakes gamble. You aren't just fighting the terrorists, you're fighting the perspective of the camera angle and the limitations of the controller. It adds a layer of unintentional survival to the action, where a single missed lock-on can be the difference between reaching the next car or seeing the game over screen for the 3rd time in a row. While the game looks like a modern shooter, it breathes through the lungs of a survival horror title, and nowhere is that more apparent than in your inventory. You aren't carrying an infinite backpack of ammo and health kits. Instead, Chase the Express forces you to respect your limited carrying capacity, echoing the item box tension of Resident Evil. You have to make hard choices about what to keep hold of as you push forward towards the engine. Do you carry that extra box of ammo, or do you leave room for a key item you haven't found yet? This creates a specific kind of anxiety that defines the gameplay loop. Because you're constantly performing that train jog back and forward between carriages, every trip is a gamble on what you might need. There is a genuine sense of relief when you find a save point in an item box, allowing you to offload the gear you don't need to reorganise for the next push. It grounds the action hero fantasy in a much more desperate reality. You aren't just a killer machine, you're a guy with limited pockets trying to manage a crisis. Scavenging for a handgun clip attachment or a grenade launcher for your assault rifle isn't just about levelling up, it's about survival. You find these parts gathered around the pre-rendered corners of the train, and they feel like a lifeline. It turns the train into a giant puzzle where the pieces are your own supplies, and managing them correctly is the only way you ensure you don't run dry when the Siberian Brigade finally corners you in a dead-end carriage. What really separates Chase the Express from the standard linear shooters of the era is its surprisingly complex branching narrative. This isn't a game where you just reach the end and see a "you win" screen. It's a game that's constantly tracking your successes and failures behind the scenes. It creates a butterfly effect where a single missed objective or a slow reaction in Disc 1 can completely alter the final hours of Disc 2. If you fail to protect a certain character or miss a timed event, the game doesn't stop, it just shifts. The story adapts to your incompetence, often leading you down to a much darker path of failing the mission. This creates a genuine sense of stakes that most PS1 games lacked. You might reach the final carriage and realise you're locked into the bad ending because something you did about 1 or 2 hours ago. A perfect example of this is the requirement for the good ending, which involves a series of specific, almost hidden actions, like finding body armour for a fellow soldier named Billy Maguire so he survives a later ambush, or being suspicious enough to swap a critical data disk with a duplicate before handing it over to a character who might not be who they say they are. On a first playthrough, without a guide or a sixth sense for spy movie tropes, you almost certainly won't get the best outcome. It turns the chase into a puzzle that spans the entire 2 discs. You aren't just trying to survive the next shootout, you're trying to navigate a political minefield where the game is happy to let you fail and deal with the consequences. It adds a layer of replayability that feels earned, not because of a high score or ranking, but because you want to go back and see if you can actually save everyone this time. It turns Jack Morton's mission into a high-stakes what-if scenario, where the ending is a direct reflection of how well you actually handled the crisis.
Am I too late?
He struggled very hard. He kept saying, "Car number 5," repeatedly right up to the last moment.
Car number 5?
The climax of Chase the Express doesn't go out with a whimper, it goes out with a literal ticking clock. Everything you've done over the course of 2 discs, every train jog from carriage 13 to carriage 6, every clunky shootout, and every item you've managed to scavenge leads to a final, high-pressure confrontation at the front of the train. The terrorist's plan isn't just about a hijacking, it's about a nuclear launch. And as you reach the engine, the game shifts from a tactical shooter into a pure, adrenaline-fueled action movie finale. This is where you face the red wire, blue wire moment. There's a literal bomb defusal segment where you're staring at a screen of wires and a countdown timer that doesn't care about your nerves. It's the ultimate 90s trope, but in the context of a game where you've spent hours physically moving through the space of the train, it feels earned. There's no wait for a cutscene here. If you hesitate or make the wrong choice, the Blue Harvest and everyone on it, the ambassador, the family you've been trying to save, and Jack himself, disappears into a pixelated mushroom cloud. It's a frantic, sweaty palms moment that perfectly caps off the experience. It forces you to make a snap decision under pressure, reflecting the all or nothing stakes of the era. You aren't just clicking through a menu. After all the backtracking and inventory management, it boils down to this one singular choice at the end of the locomotive. It's a classic Sunset era finale, dramatic, slightly unforgiving, and exactly the kind of ending a game called Nuclear Dawn deserves. By the time Covert Ops, aka Chase the Express, hit the shelves in 2000, the PlayStation was effectively a legacy console, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the Blue Harvest. This game is a masterclass in what I like to call the Sunset era polish. Because the developers of Sugar and Rocket utilised pre-rendered backgrounds, much like Resident Evil or Final Fantasy titles, they were able to squeeze every last ounce of the PlayStation 1's processing power into the character models and environmental effects. The train isn't just a static image, it feels like a heavy industrial beast. You have flickering fluorescent lights in the luggage car, steam venting from the pipes, and heat haze shimmering off the tracks. When you step outside onto the roof of a carriage, the camera angle shifts from those claustrophobic CCTV-style shots to wide cinematic pans that show the sheer scale of the locomotive hurtling through the snow-covered European landscape. The character models for Jack Morton and the terrorists have a weight and level of detail that far exceeds the wobbly polygons of the early 32-bit era. Jack actually looks like a NATO operative, and his movements, while still tied to that rigid tank control grit, feel deliberate. It's a testament of what a studio could achieve when they finally understood the hardware's limits. Even the FMVs were top tier for the time, blending into the gameplay and maintaining that high-octane Hollywood energy. It didn't just look good for a PS1 game, it looked like a statement that the grey box wasn't quite finished yet.
I see you had a lot of fun rampaging around the train. Are you an American?
Lieutenant Jack Morton, NATO Air Force. What is it you're after, Boris Zugoski?
What am I after? It's something way beyond the imagination of a man like you, who has been living in a capitalistic world. Now hand over what you found in Car 5 and the French ambassador.
But you are the one holding the French ambassador hostage.
I see you haven't got him either. Very well. I'll search for him at my leisure after I take care of you.
If the visuals sell the look of the blockbuster movie, the audio design sells the physical sensation of being trapped on a high-speed projectile. The soundscape of Chase the Express is dominated by the rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack of the wheels on the rails. It's a constant grounding presence that creates a baseline level of anxiety. When you're inside the lush, carpeted passenger cars, the sound is muffled and distant, almost peaceful, but the moment you climb a ladder on the roof, the audio mix explodes. The roar of the wind and the mechanical scream of the engine is overwhelming, making those platforming segments feel genuinely dangerous. The soundtrack is pure 90s tactical thriller gold. It's heavily inspired by the work of Hans Zimmer or Harry Gregson Williams, utilising orchestral stabs layered over driving electronic beats. It knows exactly when to pull back to a single, tense bass note while you're creeping through a dark maintenance tunnel, and when to erupt into a full-blown anthem during a boss fight. It's an action movie score in the truest sense. For a kid playing this in a dark room with headphones on, the audio didn't just support the gameplay, it dictated the pace of your heartbeat. It's one of those elements that bridges the gap between the clunky hardware and the cinematic ambition, even when the polygons are flickering. The sound of that engine roaring tells your brain exactly where you are and how fast you're moving. So why don't we hear about Chase the Express? In a world where we constantly revisit the greatest hits of the 32-bit era, this game often feels like a ghost. For me, it represents a very specific moment in time, the transition from the experimental 90s to the cinematic 2000s. It was released in the shadow of the PlayStation 2, and in the US, that generic Covert Ops Nuclear Dawn title did it zero favours. It sounded like something you'd find in a bargain bin at a petrol station, not a high-tier action thriller. It's a classic case of a game being too late to its own party. By the time it arrived, the world was looking towards Metal Gear Solid 2 and the power of DVD-based gaming, but there's a feeling to this game you just don't get in modern hyper-polished shooters. It has that glorious, slightly clunky ambition. Replaying it now, I can see the flaws. The train jog backtracking can be a chore, and the aiming system is often at mercy of the camera, but those flaws are part of its charm. It's a game where the developers clearly cared about the details, from the way the train tilts on the tracks to the subtle hidden requirements for the best engine. It's a labour of love project that tried to do everything: stealth, action, puzzles and branching narratives, all within the confines of a few train cars. It's one of those if you know titles. It reminds me of the weekend spent hurdling around a small CRT, trying to figure out which wire to cut while a literal timer ticked down on the screen. It didn't have the marketing budget of a Resident Evil, but it had the heart. Finding those hidden gems is exactly why the PSX Index project is so rewarding. It's a reminder that some of the best experiences on the console weren't necessarily the bad ones that sold millions of copies. They were the ones that took a weird idea, like Die Hard on a train with tank controls, and executed it with absolute conviction.
Calm down, Christina. Stay right there by Mason. After we get the ambassador's wife and daughter out, I'll come over.
Roger. But my husband?
He'll catch up with you very soon. I promise you I'll rescue your father. So go ahead and wait for him.
There's a reason Chase the Express remains a permanent fixture in the hidden gem conversation. It didn't just try to copy the greats. It took the mechanics we love from survival horror and tactical espionage and forged something entirely its own. It's a game that respects the player's agency, offering a deep, branching narrative and a level of polish that proved the original PlayStation was still a powerhouse even as the next generation loomed on the horizon. As we close the ledger on entry 66, I'm left with that familiar feeling of 32-bit satisfaction, the kind that comes from a game that didn't just want to entertain you, but wanted to immerse you into the high-stakes cinematic world where every second counted. It's been a hell of a ride on the Blue Harvest. We fought through the snow, navigated the train jog, and proved that a tactical thriller doesn't need a massive open world to feel epic. Sometimes all you need is a metal tube, a ticking clock, and a set of tank controls to create a masterpiece. The mission is complete, the train has reached its destination, and it's time to move on to the next entry in this massive undertaking. 68 games down, 1,210 games to go. Next time on the PSX Index, we're trading the tactical gear for a pair of white gloves and a carrot. We're moving from the gritty realism of a hijacked train to the world of cartoon physics, slapstick humour, and one of the most charming 3D platformers on the system. It's time to see if we can take a wrong turn at Albuquerque and still end up in the right era. Bugs Bunny Lost in Time is up next.
Hey, watch it, Buster. It's just a game, all right? That's the last straw. Who's responsible for this? Who are you?
Ain't I a stinker?
Bugs Bunny on PlayStation.
You're despicable.
Be quiet and listen.